everybody. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Mackenzie. I hope you are all doing well. Today, I thought we would just go through my top 5 favorite books of all time. So this list was actually a little bit difficult to figure out for me because I love so many books and I love them all for different reasons. But I think this top 5 list is a pretty good representation of what I love and why I love different kinds of books. In my top 5 position, I chose a book that I actually don't have as a physical copy. I have on my Kindle, and it is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. So Sense and Sensibility was one of Jane Austen's first books. It was published around the time of Pride and Prejudice. I think that this one is above Pride and Prejudice for me because I love the story. I love the story of the three sisters, or in the book, I guess it's mainly the two sisters, Eleanor and Marianne. In the movies, they tend to add a little bit more to the character of Margaret. I love her in the movies. She's so funny in both versions that I've seen. But I love just the stories of the girls growing up and figuring out who they are and figuring out maybe how they need to change a little bit as they figure out who they are and kind of their weaknesses and strengths. I really like how the sisters play off of each other, and they're kind of opposites in some ways. They find characteristics in their other sister that they need themselves to maybe grow a little bit, and I love that. My favorite adaptation of this book is one that I actually talked about in the last video I posted on my favorite authors of all time. I'll see if I can get a picture of it up here. Starring Hattie Morahan as Eleanor, Charity Wakefield as Marianne, and then Dan Stevens plays Edward. And it's such a beautiful movie. I just rewatched it again. It's so beautiful. The scenery, the music is lovely. It's just the cinematography is so amazing for that one, and that's definitely my favorite Jane Austen movie that has been made so far. So Sense and Sensibility tells the story of three sisters, but it mainly focuses on the two older sisters, Eleanor and Marianne. And what happens is their father dies, and as women they're not allowed to inherit their father's home, so it goes to their half-brother. The story follows them as they have to move to a cottage out in the country. It follows kind of their love stories and their stories of growing up. And it follows them as they learn about each other and about themselves. And it kind of shows some difficulties that can happen in relationships. It's just a really good story of, figuring out who you are and how you can grow and change. And I just love it so much. It's such a beautiful story to me. I also wanted to just read the first few lines of Sense and Sensibility for you, just so you can get a little idea of what the book is like. So it starts, "The family of Dashwood had long been settled in Sussex. Their estate was large, and their residence was at Norland Park, in the centre of their property, where, for many generations, they had lived in so respectable a manner as to engage the general good opinion of their surrounding acquaintance." So that's the first few lines. It just kind of starts to set the scene, and then it goes into talking about the different families. But it is such a lovely book. I highly recommend it. Let's move on to our next book. My fourth favorite book of all time is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Now, this copy is not actually an English copy, it's a Spanish copy I have. I don't have the English book in a physical copy, so I just wanted to use this instead. I have the English edition on my Kindle. I love Jane Eyre. I think Jane Eyre is really what got me into classics. I read it back in middle school, maybe around 14 or so, and I fell in love with it. The writing style was just so beautiful, and the story was amazing. It was so much fun to read it, and that's the story that really got me into classics, and that's why it's one of my favorite books of all time. So the story of Jane Eyre is about a girl named Jane Eyre, of course. It tells of her kind of growing up and growing into who she is. She starts out as a young orphan. She lives with her aunt and cousins who do not treat her well at all, and that she gets sent to a school where they also don't treat her well at all. And when she becomes old enough to leave, she sends out an advertisement to become a governess, and she ends up going to Thornfield Hall, where most of the story takes place, and we get to see her grow as a person, and we get to see how her relationships change with the family there. I don't want to give away too much, but it's such a beautiful story. There's a lovely version of this movie that I absolutely love. I will see if I can put it here. It is with Toby Stephens as Mr. Rochester, and it's just so well done. It's such a good movie. Just like in Sense and Sensibility, I wanted to give you the first few lines of the book just so you can kind of get a feel of what this book is like. Chapter 1. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. We had been wandering, indeed, in the leafless shrubbery an hour in the morning, but since dinner, Mrs. Reed, when there was no company, dined early. The cold winter wind had brought with it sounds so somber and a rain so penetrating that further outdoor exercise was now out of the question. That gives you a little bit of a feel of the story. It's a little bit darker of a story. It has more of a sad feel to it, but it has a good ending, so highly recommend this one as well. Favorite book of all time is one that I had actually kind of forgotten about because I read it such a long time ago, but it was so fantastic and I loved it so much, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. I read this around the same time that I read Jane Eyre, maybe a little bit after. I can't remember exactly when, but it was in middle school, I remember. It was such a fantastic book. I loved it so much. I felt so much smarter after I read it. I learned so much from that story. It's a very good story. It's a very long book. It's about 1,000 pages, I think. I don't have a physical copy of this book. I also have this one just on Kindle. But it's absolutely fantastic. The story is just so good, and it was so well done. It was so engaging the whole way through. There are some books that I've read that are long, like The Count of Monte Cristo, and I just feel like there's some areas where it gets a little bit too slow for me, and there's too much explaining being done and too much description, and it just feels very unnecessary. Even though I absolutely love really detailed descriptions, it just, sometimes the way that those really long books do it, I don't like it quite as well, but The Count of Monte Cristo is an absolutely fantastic book, and I love it so much. I can't recommend it enough. It is so good. It follows the story of this man named Edmond Dantes, and he is wrongly accused at the beginning for something he didn't do, and he's put in jail for this. The whole book tells the story of him getting into this situation in which he's wrongly accused and then coming out of jail after, and it shows how his relationships with the people he knew before he went into jail changed, and how he changed, integrated back into the community that he was in before he disappeared. So it's so well done, and if you've seen the movie, it's a very good movie, but it's very different than the book. Especially towards the end, the way he interacts with the characters after he comes back is very different than how the movie portrays, but it's just such a fantastic book. So good. So just like with my other books, I'm just gonna read the first few lines to you so you can get a little bit of a feel for what The Count of Monte Cristo is like. Marseille, the arrival. On the 24th of February, 1810, the lookout at Notre Dame de la Garde signaled the three master, the Pharaon from Smyrna, Trieste, and Naples. As usual, a pilot put off immediately, and rounding the Chateau d'If, got on board the vessel between Cape Morillon and Rion Island. So that's just the first few lines again. Sorry if I totally messed up the French words, but I tried. Such a good book though. It's so well done, so well written, and so engaging. And my second favorite book of all time is Tess of the D'Urbervilles. This book is such a beautifully written book. It's not everybody's favorite. There are a lot of people I've heard that don't like this book at all, and I can completely understand because it's one of those books that's very difficult to get through. It's a very depressing story. Really not much good happens in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, but I found it to be such a beautiful story and such a powerful story, even though it's very sad. It's a story that sticks with you and you can't really easily get it out of your mind, I don't think. I found it to be so moving. I honestly sobbed after I finished this book, and not many books make me sob like that. I don't cry very easily when it comes to books, but this one made me cry so hard. That's probably why I like it so much. It can probably sound kind of weird, but it definitely made an impact on me, and it's so good. So good. I want to give you a little bit of a synopsis of what Tess of the D'Urbervilles is about without giving away too much, but the main story is about a girl named Tess, or she starts out as Tess Durbeyfield, but when her father finds out that they're actually from the D'Urberville family, and it's about her going to her relatives that her parents found out about to claim kin. And the story follows what happens when she meets her cousin named Alec D'Urberville. I don't want to give away too much because there's a really important thing that happens that drives the whole plot along. It's a story that talks about the fallen woman, so you can kind of get an idea of what ends up happening with that. But it's just such a moving story, and it's so good. It's so powerful. Thomas Hardy was definitely making a point about how women were treated during the Victorian period, especially when they were considered fallen. I will read to you the first few lines again. Thomas Hardy's writing style is beautiful. That's another reason why I love this book so much. His writing is so incredible. And I love his other stories too because of how incredibly he writes about nature, about life. His descriptions of nature are some of the most beautiful passages ever. Chapter 1. On an evening in the latter part of May, a middle-aged man was walking homeward from Shaston to the village of Marlott, in the adjoining vale of Blakemore, or Blackmore. The pair of legs that carried him were rickety, and there was a bias in his gait which inclined him somewhat to the left of a straight line. He occasionally gave a smart nod, as if in confirmation of some opinion, though he was not thinking of anything in particular. It's such a beautiful story, even though it's a very depressing story. Nothing really that great happens in the story at all, ever, but I absolutely love it for just how incredibly Thomas Hardy was able to make the point that he was trying to make. It's so incredibly powerful. And last but certainly not least is my favorite book of all time, The Lord of the Rings. So this book is, I guess, technically split into 3 books. Kind of. My favorite of all 3 is The Two Towers. So good. The Lord of the Rings is such an incredible story. It's so amazing. He did such an incredible job with being so meticulous about the details of his world, and it's so incredible to see it unfold. Tolkien did such an amazing job creating this whole world and making you feel like you belong there. Like, for me, like, I love the Shire so much. It's so beautiful, and it's a place that I honestly feel like would be a place that I would want to live. I love the simple life that the hobbits lead and the way that they just enjoy the small, quiet, simple things in life. Those are the things that I love too, just those, you know, those little everyday activities like going to have tea or reading a book, something lovely like that. I talked about this a little bit in my last video as well, how I got to be a fan of this book, because when I was in high school, I tried reading The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I finished The Hobbit and finished The Fellowship of the Ring, but I ended up not liking either of them at all, really. I'm not exactly sure why I didn't like them. I think I just felt like they took way too long to read and they were very boring. That's what I thought about them then. But, I think it was 2 years ago now, I finally decided to read The Lord of the Rings again. We'd actually watched the movie that came out recently called Tolkien, about his life, and that got me interested in trying to read it again. And I fell in love with it this time, and I think part of it was that I studied linguistics in college. Of course, languages were his main interest when it came to his world. It's so cool how he created languages and then put the world around it. It is so cool to me. And I'm actually doing my master's thesis on that right now. I just started working on my research process for that, so it's been very interesting so far. I'm going to make a review of a book I just read for that. That'll be coming out soon, hopefully, as well. It's called The Secret Vice, and I will tell you more about that in another video, but it's been so much fun getting into the world of Tolkien more. And I love the movies. The Return of the King is, I think, my favorite movie of all time. Such a well done movie. They're so good. In case you don't know what Lord of the Rings is, I will actually read the back of the book to you. This is the one book that I chose that actually has a synopsis on the back, which is very nice. Alright, so here's what it says. In ancient times, the rings of power were crafted by the elven smiths, and Sauron, the Dark Lord, forged the One Ring, filling it with his own power so that he could rule all others. But the One Ring was taken from him, and though he sought it throughout Middle-earth, it remained lost to him. After many ages it fell by chance into the hands of the hobbit, Bilbo Baggins. From Sauron's fastness in the Dark Tower of Mordor, his power spread far and wide. Sauron gathered all the great rings, but always he searched for the One Ring that would complete his dominion. When Bilbo reached his 111st birthday, he disappeared, bequeathing to his young cousin Frodo the ruling ring and a perilous quest to journey across Middle-earth, deep into the shadow of the Dark Lord, and destroying the ring by casting it into the cracks of doom. The Lord of the Rings tells of the great quest undertaken by Frodo and the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf the Wizard, the hobbits Merry, Pippin, and Sam, Gimli the Dwarf, Legolas the Elf, Boromir of Gondor, and a tall, mysterious stranger called Strider. So I'll just read the first few lines of The Lord of the Rings. Such a lovely beginning to a story. Chapter 1, A Long-Expected Party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 111st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. Just giving you a little bit of a taste of what The Lord of the Rings is like. Such an incredible story. It sucks you right in and it makes you feel like you're right in there with the characters. It is so well written. So amazing. And I want to reread this again. I want to reread, I think, mostly all the books I talked about today, but I for sure want to reread this again, and I'm gonna need to for my thesis, which I'm super excited about. Alright guys, that is all I have for you today. I will see you again soon for another video. Bye!